This is Dead Serious, a show about short horror stories worthy of discussion. I'm Dead Palette, and I'm reading stories from the 15 Hours Tumblr, Pigskin Pugilists. Today we're going to be taking a look at a tale from Malaysia. Not any specific tale, I guess, but that's the title of this story. As always, you can find it with the link in the description. Let's get right into it. A few weeks ago, my boss told me he was going back home to Malaysia to attend his brother's wedding. I never met his brother before, and was surprised when he told me that I was invited as well. My boss and I were close, but I never thought he would made me his plus one. Turns out he just didn't want to be alone with his very strict Muslim family, and dragged me along so they had someone else to be disgusted with. So that is a good hook. Really like how this is starting out. A little wonky on the grammar, especially the part of and dragged me along so they had someone else to be disgusted with. I'm not sure if the they is referring to he, the boss, or the family being disgusted at him and his American friend. It's a little unclear. But I get the general gist of this, and that is interesting to me. There's going to be a cultural clash. There's a lot of these 15-hour horror stories that tend to deal with cultural clashes, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that the person who runs the 15 Hours Tumblr is from Singapore and speaks English, so maybe they've dealt with these kinds of things too. After the wedding was over and done with, my boss, whose name is Mohammad, and shall henceforth be known as Mo, took me on a tour of his country. On the last day, he took me to his old university, where a friend of his now lectures. After looking around the place and showing me some of the places he used to hang out and smoke weed on campus, he took me to his friend who went by Mikey. Okay, this is realistic. The setup for this is just a pretense to get our narrator, who is not from Malaysia, to Malaysia. So the wedding itself is irrelevant, but it's a way to just open up a story. After the introductions were done, they did what every group of people do when they see each other for the first time in a long time. They reminisce. They talked about high school, university, and all the crazy stuff they did when they were kids. To me, the story sounded reasonably normal, but then they grew up in a strict Muslim society, and I grew up in Australia. What do I know? Okay, so our narrator, is Australian. But this again enforces the idea that this is going to be about some sort of cultural clash, and that I always find interesting myself. That is part of, just traveling and seeing other cultures, is inevitably there's going to be something that goes wrong when people don't see eye to eye. At one point, however, they started talking about their old girlfriends, and the name Triss was mentioned. When Mikey brought this Triss up, I saw Mo's face freeze. A shadow hung over his eyes, and all traces of a smile faded from his face. Intrigued, I asked what was bothering him, and he told me the following story. So now I'm beginning to wonder if the way that this is being structured is relevant, or if it's just the kind of trailing off that I do as an author and as a person as well, where it starts out, my boss was getting married, so we went to Malaysia. Then we went to a university, and then one of the friends told me about this other story, and so it seems like the story is going to be the focus now, and you can criticize that however you like. It works for me, but I don't necessarily have a justification for as to why this kind of trailing off necessarily works for me. But let's get into it. Triss and Mo had been dating for about 6 months when he moved into an apartment block near his university. The apartment he had booked was shared with 5 other guys, including Mikey, and the block itself was packed with families. The walls were thin, so they had to be damn careful about making too much noise. Apparently there's nothing more dangerous than a self-righteous Muslim family who thinks 7 p.m. is a reasonable bedtime. I wonder what they mean by making too much noise. Are they talking about laughing and joking, or hanging and banging? But again, this is all just setting up the scene and the culture there, and it's all working for me. Anyway, one afternoon the 6 guys were sitting around watching everyone's favorite action movie, Rambo. Guns and explosions, every teenage guy's favorite popcorn movie. About halfway through, Tris came in, said hello to the gang, and beckoned Mo into the other room. Mo quickly followed, thinking he was getting laid, only to have Tris wrap him in a hug and press her face against his shoulder, and started bawling. Mo stood there silently for an hour, letting her get it all out of her system. Okay, so we need to know what is going on as to why she is upset, so let's just press on. After a couple of minutes, Tris pushed him away and smiled. She needed to get changed and wash her face, and she wanted to be alone for a minute. Mo, wildly confused by the whole thing, yeah, me too, went and sat outside with everyone else and kept watching the movie. These kinds of authors, and I include myself in this, I have to be careful about it, seem to have problems dealing with time. So we have the line, Mo stood there silently for an hour, quickly followed by, after a couple of minutes, Trish pushed him away. That doesn't make any sense. And I think it has something to do with, this author, my author, we have, myself rather, have a similar thought process, and for some reason, it just doesn't comprehend how to write time into a story effectively, and finding solutions to that is important. Nearly half an hour later, Mo was starting to get worried. Tris had been in the bedroom for far, far too long, and while he didn't want to interrupt whatever she was doing in there, he was determined to find out what the problem was. He knocked on the door and was surprised when the door swung open instantly and Tris pushed past him, moving to sit on the couch. A space was made for her, and she sat down, but with a totally stiff back. Her knees were at a perfect 90-degree angle, and she was perched precariously on the edge of the seat, looking not unlike a gargoyle. She wasn't even watching the screen, just staring at the people sitting on the floor in front of her. I think it's weird that they didn't mention Mo trying to figure out what was going on with Tris when they were hugging, didn't ask her any questions. I mean, I'm presuming that he did, but they don't say so explicitly, and that just it's weird to me. Anyway, Mo approached her cautiously. Everyone had noticed how she was acting at this point, and they were all turning around to look at her. Mo smiled, trying to be reassuring, and asked her what she was doing. She looked up, but not into his eyes. It seemed as if she was looking over his shoulder. So the strange behavior that Tris is exhibiting is interesting to me. I'm just wondering if it's leading somewhere and ultimately means something, because people don't act like that for no reason. I want there to be some sort of logic, because thus far, this is a very personal story. It is written like a travel blog. It isn't written as a romantic grand narrative. It is just a thing that happened to a person, and I'm wanting some sort of logic behind it. There's a man outside. I saw him outside the window. He wants to come in. So Tris is saying this. But sweetheart, we're on the 3rd floor. This reply seemed to float through the room. Everyone's attention was fixed on the pair now, but Tris seemed totally unaware of everything that wasn't just over the point of Mo's shoulder. Suddenly, she shifted her gaze and started staring directly into Mo's chest. Without any warning, she started screaming, a piercing, horrifying, open-mouthed scream that exploded the entire room into action. I wonder if it's after 7 p.m. and they're trying to shut her up after this. Everyone in the room went to cover Tris's mouth at the same time, and she was knocked onto the floor, still screaming. She started lashing out, connecting with vicious punches that left horrible bruises. Everyone grabbed a limb, pinning her down on the ground, but she was still screaming. The sound of gunshots and explosions from Rambo mixed with the chaos in the room, making the whole scene feel like something out of the Second World War. That is beautiful phrasing. That is a nice little crescendo here that was kind of... crescendo, I guess, isn't the right word. Fever pitch. what's the term I'm looking for here? Everything suddenly just hit the fan, and this is describing the chaos in this scene that was previously just a little bit of tension, and then boom, it ramps up into crazy town. Mikey suddenly remembered something. It was clear, at least to him, what he had to do. He ran out of the room, dug into his bag, and found what he was looking for. A small vial filled with sand, a gift that his father brought back from his pilgrimage to Mecca. He quickly filled a jug with water, then sprinkled some of the sand over it while muttering a few short prayers. When he was done, he rushed over to the group and started to pour the holy water over Triss, hoping this would blast what ear, there's no V in whatever, what the hell was in her free. So she's being possessed by Shadow Mohammad, or maybe just Mohammad. Political commentary. The effect was a little different. The struggling and the flailing stopped, but the screaming didn't. Her eyes rolled back into the back of her head, and the pitch of her scream changed from high to impossibly deep. Mike started yelling passages from one of the holy books of Islam, pouring water on her face and shouting the words into her ears, but to no avail. All it did was make whatever was in her very, very angry. She started flailing twice as hard as before, and the screaming, shockingly, got louder. So there's this weird common misconception that people have that there is only one book in Islam. There are multiple books. I don't know why people think that there's just the Quran, but that's the idea that's propagated, and they're mentioning that here. But just me culturally enlightening you. But there's I don't know how to feel about this. This seems just like a possession story that you would hear in the West, and it's I don't know. It's not doing anything for me. Shyly got louder. Mikey had one last plan. He sprinted to the front door and jammed it open, then did the same to the veranda door. He ran back to Triss and started screaming, "You need to leave. You can't stay here. We won't let you stay. You have to leave now." While he screamed this, he poured the last of the water over Triss and dumped the rest of the sand into her mouth. The screaming stopped. I would imagine so, because her mouth was full of sand. Her eyes closed, and she stopped flailing. Regardless and suspicious of some sort of trick, nobody moved. They all kept her limbs tightly pressed against the floor, refusing to budge. Mo whispered her name into her ear, and her eyes fluttered open. "Mo, what are you guys doing? Why am I wet?" I've heard this story before. Anyway, apparently that's the last they heard from that particular spirit. None of their neighbors made any complaints, and by some minor miracle, Triss hadn't broken anything with all her flailing. Mikey was pissed that he lost such a precious gift from his dad. But otherwise, nobody was hurt. Later, after they all recovered a little bit, they asked her what she remembered of the ordeal, and she replied, "All I remember is hearing someone outside and going to open the window to see what happened. Then, I woke up with all of you on top of me." A grand old little Malaysian bukkake story by Squeaky Peaky. So there's like this discussion of, sand from Mecca and this Islamic stuff and everything, but then they don't go into any detail about why the spirit is different than, like Christian ghosts and possessions and stuff like that. It really kind of lacked the personality I was hoping for. I was hoping for this to be tied into some sort of scripture, but it wasn't. I was hoping for there to be some reason as to why this story started out. My boss was going to take me to Malaysia and then to the university and then talk to a friend and then go into the story. It seems like it could have just been explained by a friend of a friend told me this story. He's from Malaysia. And that just seems like we wasted a bunch of time getting to the actual meat of the story, and then the meat of the story didn't have enough details, I don't think. Like, you're talking about Malaysia, and you're talking about, like, the Rambo stuff I really liked, because it's like, you as a Westerner might not expect that they would like to watch something like Rambo, but to them, that's like a teenage fantasy. That is a cool detail to me. That is information that I didn't know that is further setting the scene. But then there's just like these vagaries about, I guess, oppressive, is conservative Islam there, but then at the same time, Islam and Mecca save the day. I'm not sure what they're trying to tell me here. I don't feel that this had a strong direction for where it wanted to go, honestly. This story is far from unsalvageable, though. There's a lot of cool little details in there. I just wish that there would be more information about Islam in the story, and more specifically, Islam from Malaysia. I think that would be interesting and enlightening. But two, if you could swap out every detail here about Islam with Christianity, and instead of it being Malaysia, be like apart from a place in Africa where they are Christian, and nothing would change, really. It'd be the same story. There's not enough personality here that sets it apart from other religion. Like, it's interchangeable. It's like there's the religion, and the religion serves this function in the story, rather than giving us any details about what makes this Islam ghost different than another ghost. Maybe my expectations were too high. Let me know if you think my expectations for wanting an Islamic ghost to be different than a Christian ghost are unreasonable. Maybe they are. I'm not sure. But there you have it. Still an interesting read. The beginning started off promising, and there were a few good bits throughout, but overall kind of disappointed. Now, if you enjoyed that, consider helping out the community and supporting my channel. You can support the community by conversing in the comments below, going to creativehorror.com, that's creativehorror.com, for a whole host of horror-based podcasts specifically for artists, writers, and anyone creative. You can support me by subscribing to the channel, following me on social media, links down in the description, and pledging to my Patreon, which is also down below. Thank you so much for your time, and now on to our sponsor at this non-moment in time. Pope Francis, reigning Prime Minister of Catholicism.